What's up, everybody? Yo, 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 it's Tyler with Hooksets Are Free. I am late hopping on here, so I apologize. Had a little mishap in creating the live stream tonight and getting my butt in here. So I apologize to those of you who maybe have been waiting because I let you know at about 8 o'clock tonight that I'd be going live shortly after 8. And then here I am lagging, trying to get my lazy butt on here. And it wasn't for the sake of laziness so much as it was just struggling with the thumbnail and the title and stuff. So sorry about that. I apologize. It's about 9:30 here on Friday night, May the 6th. So hope you guys had a good Cinco de Mayo and so forth, or looking for the weekend. Hope you guys enjoyed your week this past week. So I'll give people just a moment or two to hop in here, tell you about my week this week. It was unconventional in that I didn't really have the opportunity to get out and do any bass fishing. But as usual, that is going to be the topic of tonight's live stream. In fact, if you saw by the title of the video, this is actually going to be more or less a breakdown in talking about JDM baits, both hard baits and soft plastics. So, technically speaking, I said this is 10 must-have JDM baits, but it really webs out further than just 10 baits. It's really more 10 categories, and I've got kind of my top pick and then a handful of runner-ups or backups. And the cool thing about this conversation is that the JDM market, and if you don't know what JDM stands for, obviously it's Japanese domestic market. So technically speaking, these are supposed to be baits that are made by Japanese lure manufacturers and meant for the Japanese domestic market, as opposed to, say, the US domestic market. However, you're going to notice that a lot of these baits are actually made for both markets, and some of them even more so for the US market, but are Japanese lure manufacturers. So I don't see any comments in the chat right now. If you guys are one of the 9 people in here and one of the 6 people who have hit the thumbs up button for me, leave a comment in the chat right now. Let me know if you're here, because I might have a slight issue in being able to see your guys's your comments right now, and I'm not exactly sure why that would be the case. Here they are. Wow. They were hidden from me for a moment, so sorry about that. Looks like we got Matt in here. Says, "What's up, Tyler? Caught a bunch of fish yesterday off the Z crank for a mega bass and the Reezy crank. Nice, dude. That Reezy is doing work for you. That's pretty sweet to see." We got Daniel T in the house. Yo, yo. Frank Doucette, my man. And Abe, Cool Granddaddy Sweets. How's it going, man? Adam Odin. Matt says, "But I did lose a bunch of baits earlier this week, tallying over $100+. So I guess it made up for it." Yeah, that's tough. Did get to restock some baits in the mail today from the hookup. Some of the baits that I lost. Okay, got it. So yeah, I see your comments. My bad, guys. I don't know why that was hidden from me. I just had to drop something down and grab the live chat instead of the quote unquote top chat. I don't know why it was doing that to me, but oh well. Marcos Figueroa. What's up, dude? How you doing? Megaforce Mark in the house. Guys, hope you are having a great Friday night. Tonight we're going to talk about JDM baits. I'll give you a quick little rundown of what my week consisted of. I did not do a lot of fishing, but on Tuesday I did manage to get out for a full day of fishing with my dad. So awesome memories built. Bank that one in the books for sure. It was a fly fishing adventure to um, private property, is a stretch of, it's technically a creek, but it's really more of a river, about 2 hours southwest of here, and is actually one of the members of the Coors family. So pretty cool that we happen to know that guy. And this is the second time that I've fished his property. First time was about this time last year. So, very cool experience to be able to get out there. He had just recently stocked his stretch of the creek, which is about a mile or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, but absolutely bonkers fishing. It seemed like he had almost overstocked the place, but the cool thing is he stocks it heavily with a certain strain of trout that is called a Donaldson rainbow trout, and it's almost like, a local version of what would be like a steelhead. It's a rainbow trout, but it's very chromy in look, and it fights super hard. The guy who owns the property was explaining that essentially these fish are almost like a dog with food. Like they just don't know when to stop, and so it's kind of crazy. These fish are super acrobatic and they just keep digging, just keep fighting. They never give up. So eventually, you do need to tighten your drag down and bring those fish in or intentionally pop them off because they will just fight, fight, fight until they have nothing left. And then it's difficult to revive them. So we never had that issue. Of overfighting the fish and not being able to revive any of them, but we did catch a load of fish, probably 50 plus in a 6, 7 hour day. So very productive day of fishing and was super, super exciting. So he actually, in addition to the stretch of creek or river that he's got a private pond on the property. This property is probably a few hundred acres, and he's got a small pond that he just recently stocked with a couple hundred fish, and it's maybe like a 1 acre pond. So it's overcrowded as it is. And he stocked it just less than a week ago. So me and one other dude went up there with some woolly buggers, just throwing streamers at these virgin trout in this virgin pond. They had never eaten a fly before, never eaten anything except for pellets. And we caught the snot out of them. It was super fun, really dialed in our woolly bugger game, if you will. So sorry to talk your ear off about fly fishing because I know that's not what most of you are here for. And we will talk about JDM bass fishing baits here in 1 second. So we're about 8 minutes into the video. We got 10, almost 11 people in here. That number keeps jumping a little bit. We got 9 thumbs up on the video. If you're sitting in here and haven't already hit the thumbs up button for me, do me a favor real quick and do that. And if somehow you're watching this video and you're not subscribed to the channel, please do me that favor as well. And make sure you turn on the notification so that next time I go live or post a video that you guys have an opportunity to get notified and hop in and join in on the fun. So thank you guys for your support. And we'll get into talking about this list here. I would love to know your guys' feedback on the list itself, on some of these individual baits. And while I'm kind of going through each category of baits, let me know what your favorite is, or if you think specifically that I'm missing something from the list. Okay. Marco says, "Oh wow, I catch a rainbow last week, and I thought it was death when I released it, and it did fight like a dog. I'm from Ohio. Yeah, when releasing trout, especially if they fight hard and your drag is set relatively loose, if you're fighting a trout for more than a couple of minutes, you definitely need to take the time to revive that fish, hold on to it by its tail, let it recover and breathe before you let it swim away. Do not just toss it back because that can often be the death of those fish. So do keep that in mind. It's super important to put those fish in the current or to move them back and forth, kind of get that water and air flowing through their gills so that they can kind of revive that much quicker. But More important with trout than it is with bass, but I still think it's important really with all fish if you are fighting them for an extended period of time. And that's relative depending on the species of fish, of course. Frank says, FYI, I'm good with the fly fishing talk. All right, dude. Well, yeah, it was crazy. We were catching them on literally almost anything and everything that we threw at them. And I probably threw 10 or 12 different patterns, and they were eating everything. So most of the day, I was throwing 2 to 3 flies on each setup. But these fish were aggressive. The weather was fairly nice. It was a day that was kind of sandwiched between 2 cold days. We had some rain for 2 or 3 days this week. So the moisture is much needed and appreciated here in Colorado, but it affects fishing weather, of course. But we had a warmer day and these fish were blowing up on top. So I had kind of a dry fly, a bigger pattern, to 1 or 2 droppers below that, as opposed to say a nymph and 2 midges or something of the sort, with a strike indicator. So it was kind of a cool deal to be able to catch these fish on top a lot of the day, and have that visual bite. Have these fish that were super aggressive, eating on top, jumping out of the water, and I caught like everything on GoPro. So um, whether or not I end up posting that, we shall see. But I've got like 6 hours worth of footage, so yeah, it would be a lot to go through. I've watched a little bit of it back, like the um, some of the footage from fishing the streamer at the pond. But Matt says a bass that I caught the other day had its rear tail damn near shredded off, like something bit it. It was gnarly, but the fish was completely fine and fighting very well. It had to have been a snakehead. Interesting. Yeah, we don't have snakehead here, so I don't know what to tell you. Uh, I've definitely seen fish with, cut or, like you say, shredded tails, but not like they were bitten off by a snakehead or a pike or a muskie, anything like that. That's crazy. Mark says, no fishing here. It keeps raining and I like to fly fish, but I'm unexperienced. Gotcha. Well, we can talk about fly fishing another time, maybe specifically do a stream or a video on fly fishing and talk about different setups, different uh, casts and techniques, depending on uh, what type of water you're fishing and how to target those trout for the most part. But fly fishing is different depending on the species of fish that you're targeting. So, all right, let's get into this, guys. By the way, I'm drinking some New Belgium beers, local here to Colorado. This is a hazy, juicy IPA, pretty delicious, 7.5%, so a little bit strong. And then I'm gonna wrap this guy up and switch over to a bourbon here in probably the next 10 minutes, and tell you guys just a little bit about it because it's a new discovery to me, um, and one worth looking into if you like to drink bourbon. So onto the list. We're 13 and a half minutes in. Let's get into some JDM baits, specifically ones that I consider to be must-have JDM baits. And I mentioned this in the first 5 minutes. I wasn't able to see your guys' comments, but some of these baits are going to be not technically JDM because they're made by Japanese lure manufacturers, but not exclusively for the Japanese domestic market. In fact, many of these are readily available here in the U.S., whether you buy them at Tackle Warehouse or otherwise. So it's not like they're unheard of baits, and that's why they fit into this category of must have, in my opinion. Some of them are a little bit off the wall, but not many. Okay. Dustin Taylor says, damn, just seen you're on. I'm getting ready to hit the river tomorrow. Might as well listen and retie. Well, sweet, Dustin. Yeah, I've just been kind of dilly-dallying the last 15 minutes, and we're just now going to get into it. We're talking about JDM baits tonight, and kind of going to cover the spectrum here. Just going to try to flow through it more or less, and I will try to keep myself to 10 minutes or less per category. could certainly just be a couple minutes. So we'll see about this. First category is swim baits, and I'm not going to cover hard plastic swim baits because there's a wide spectrum, and especially uh, spectrum of budget when it comes to hard swim baits. And so, the main hard baits that I would mention when it comes to swim baits are like the Jackal Gantarel, not JDM, the Depth Slide Swimmer, the DRT Clash 9, but I don't have as much experience with the Slide Swimmer or the Tiny Clash. So we're not going to talk about hard swim baits as much as we are soft swim baits. And there's really just two in this category. And the goal was to pick one per category. So you guys already know what's coming here. Any guesses? Five, four, three, two, one. Megabass Magdraft hits the number one spot for must-have JDM swim baits, and not just the regular, but I've got two alternatives to the Magdraft. One I don't have with me right now. It's actually up in the garage. I've been carrying it around with me, looking for a good opportunity to try it. But that is the 5-inch Magdraft, which is more of a JDM specific bait, but is cool because it's a downsized version of the traditional Magdraft, where you get the magnetic system with that belly treble hook. So you can tuck the treble hook into the belly or just let it hang by the magnet itself. But you'll find that the magnet doesn't hold it extremely well. So on a cast or throughout your retrieve, that thing is going to come free and be swimming below the bait. Not a huge deal, but you are a little bit more prone to hanging up. So as I've explained before, I like to turn the hook and tuck it and kind of texpose it, if you will, into the bottom of the bait. So then you've got two hook points exposed here, but the magnet is not what's holding it, but rather the belly slot. And so then when you set the hook, then this thing's going to come out, and then you've got the swivel, and awesome bait here in the Magdraft. I think everybody knows that, but the Magdraft comes in a 6, 8, and a 10-inch size. Obviously, the 10-inch is absolutely massive. The 8 is probably arguably the best size. I don't have experience with it, but the 6-inch is the most popular and what I would consider mostly a must-have because it is just so fishable. You don't have to have dedicated gear to use it. And it's a fantastic bait. What I actually prefer is the Magdraft Freestyle because of its versatility and all of the different ways that you can fish it. And I say all of the different ways, but really there's going to be two main ways that you're going to fish it, maybe three. But the main one being just on a keel-weighted EWG swim bait hook. Okay, now this is an underspin version of that, but on this bait, I like to use a 6/0 owner beast hook. Some people use an 8/0. I think the 6/0 is perfect. I don't feel the need to step up to an 8/0. So, in my opinion, this bait is not too big. I think fish of all sizes will eat this thing extremely well. So, I would not be concerned with the size of this bait. Now, I've used this bait and then just unrigged it and put it back in the package. It's already fairly torn up. So what I'll go ahead and do for you is just unrig one of these other swim baits that's got a 6/0 owner beast on it. which I am going to order more of the beast hooks in that size specifically because I do need more. I've really got more of the 4/0 than the 6/0, but here's the 6/0 owner beast. You'll see that right next to it, it lines up really well. I changed the size of the CPS spring to a large as opposed to the medium. Most of the time, if I feel like the bait can take it, it's a little bit big for this bait here, but not dramatically so. So you'll see what it can do is twist the nose a little bit, make it just a little bit warped, which is not ideal, but also not that big of a deal. Boom. So here we go. This is the 6-inch Megabass Magdraft on a 6/0 owner beast. So as you can see, you got plenty of gap there where when you set the hook, this thing gives you a lot of bite. And I think it comes back far enough in the bait. Plus, you're going to have a lot of fish eat this thing completely. Um, and so I don't personally feel like you need an 8/0. And when you're using a 6/0, you can use a 1/4 ounce in addition to a 3/8 ounce size. So I prefer that 1/4 ounce size actually uh, when using the Magdraft Freestyle. Two other ways that you can rig it are with a stinger hook or just as a line through if you wanted to do that. Um, and then what some people do, I don't really do it as much with this bait, but you can snip off the nose section just behind the eye and then throw on a bigger jig head on this thing. This is probably just a little too big. Here using this 1 ounce 8/0 hook on there. Probably a little bit big, but could work fine. But you'd want to have something in the ballpark of like a 6/0 hook, even if you're using an exposed jig. But you could run it as just a standalone swim bait with an exposed hook out of the top of the bait. The Magdraft is meant to be fished at a true medium speed. I find that it doesn't give enough tail kick if you're fishing it very slowly. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're fishing it very quickly, that thing will have a tendency to just kind of roll on its side and swim a little bit funny. So, as I've said a million times, it is a speed sensitive bait. And I think it really wants to be fished somewhere between a medium slow and a medium fast retrieve. Anywhere in that ballpark is just fine. But I prefer it on a medium to medium fast retrieve. Then you get that combination of a good tail kick and then that head wag combination, which is absolutely crucial to getting um, numbers and quality of bites. Now, in this same conversation, a JDM bait that is less available for whatever reason these days, um, but is definitely worth talking about, is the IMA Stealth Swimmer. Okay, this is a very similar concept bait in that it has a magnet system, but this also comes two to a pack, kind of like the Freestyle. However, these are already rigged like the standard Magdraft, but as you can see, the hook is inside the bait. So the Stealth Swimmer has a unique system in it where it doesn't have a magnet holding the treble hook to the bottom, but rather a magnet holding the jig hook to the bottom that then easily ejects when you set the hook. Okay. And you get an absolute ton of clearance. You get a perfect kind of medium wire hook on here that is sticky sharp. and really cool system. You've also got a hook hanger so that you could rig a stinger hook on the bottom and then have it stick to the magnet like a traditional mag draft, and then you get kind of the best of both worlds, but a slightly worse hookup ratio on this thing. So uh, the main difference, aside from what I just mentioned with the hook system, is that this bait has a little bit more tail to it. So I find that it's not as speed sensitive. You can see that it's more narrow on the top and fat on the belly. And in my opinion, that allows this bait to track more true at a wider variety of speeds. It's also got a slightly uh, softer and thinner tail. So this thing will kick better at slower speeds, but then it will run truer at high speeds. So I really like that about it. It's just a little bit more versatile than the Magdraft, and it's more weedless. So this bait is not super easy to find, unfortunately, but it is a good one for sure. So if you didn't already know about the Amakatsu Stealth Swimmer, you need to look into it. I don't know how easily you're going to find them these days because they don't seem very available at the moment. But keep in mind that that could change at any time and that you should keep your eye out for the Stealth Swimmer. I rigged both of those, uh, on similar setups. I prefer, you could get away with just like a heavy power fast action rod, but I prefer more of like a traditional type of swim bait setup that is more of a medium heavy, moderate fast, that still has a lot of backbone, so you can still jack them just fine. Um, but you can get away with just kind of a jig rod or a flipping stick. And I prefer somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon, depending on the part of the water column that I want to be fishing. And yeah, so that is category number one. Any questions or opinions? Matt says, Tyler, you need to check out the BioVex Joint Bait 110. Sick little hard bait, great minnow profile or shad. Um, Swims very good at all speeds and slowly floats. You can get to slowly sink though. Marco says this is the time to throw it. Great for skipping. Yeah, the Magdraft is great for skipping. I agree with that, but I don't think it's necessarily a bait that is pigeonholed into fishing this time of year necessarily. I've had success on it at a variety of times throughout the year. So I don't necessarily agree with that. You say I throw it all day if you want to be successful with it. Not a lot of catches, but you will get some really big girls on it. Love it. Um, yeah, I agree. You're not going to get a million bites on the Mag Draft or the Stealth Swimmer, but you still can have surprisingly productive days. Um, Personally, I've probably only caught upwards of 3 or 4 fish in a day on it, but I am never out fishing for an entire day. So I've had it be as productive as other lures. Um, but you're right that when they eat it well, but they don't always eat it well. Matt says I've had more success with the Stealth Swimmer than the Mag Draft. Yeah, I know that you've mentioned that that you're a big fan of the Stealth Swimmer, but maybe not as much with the Mag Draft. And I think part of that has to do with the speed sensitivity of it. The Mag Draft has gotten a whole lot of press just because people have fished tournaments rather successfully using it, and it has just kind of blown up. Word of mouth spreads quickly, and it's been a bait that just has been on fire for the last handful of years. But the Stealth Swimmer is kind of an underground type of bait. So that is a reason that I wanted to mention it tonight. Um, Imakatsu Stealth Swimmer. Okay. Category number 2 is going to be jerkbait. So I'm going to keep it relatively mainstream here. And I'm going to mention 3 baits. They're all readily available in the US. First is in the family of the Megabass Vision 110. Should be no surprise there, right? But for me, I think what takes the cake is the Vision 110 Junior. Okay, you get the same super refined, crisp action of the Vision 110, but in a smaller profile. Still very castable. The thing is 3/8 of an ounce versus a half ounce that you get with the standard Vision 110. But this thing is just under 4 inches in length as opposed to 4.5 inches with the 110. And it still comes with 3 treble hooks on it. So, of course, there's smaller treble hooks so that everything fits right and the bait still suspends right. Everything is just a little bit downsized on this bait, but I find that I get bit just a little bit better. And a big part of that is the fact that it runs just a hair shallower, suspends about a foot to 2 feet shallower than the standard Vision 110. So this is more of a 3 to 5 foot diver as opposed to like 4 to 6 foot on the original Vision 110. But both are awesome baits, and kind of top of my list when it comes to JDM jerkbaits. Okay, second on my list, and this should be no surprise, also a very popular bait. This is the Jackal Re-Range in the 110 size. So they make this in a 110 and a 130, and this is a little bit more of a warm water jerkbait. It's got a magnetic weight transfer system in it that is crazy loud and scary. Sounds like you broke the bait off, you cracked your rod. Something is wrong when you actually go to cast that thing out there. It cracks the whip for sure. So it casts a mile, and it's got these flat sides on it. So you'll probably be able to see that flat sides on the bait, and it's got a really aggressive darting action, and it runs shallow. So I fish this in more like 2 to 4 feet of water. Sometimes I'll step up to like a 15-pound fluorocarbon, and that thing will run fairly shallow for me. And you can hit it really hard, and you can fish it quickly. So that is a must-have for sure. Is the Jackal Re-Range, and I prefer it in the 110. Although I haven't really fished the 130, and I look forward to giving it a shot this year. I did just pick up the 130 in the off season this year, and specifically in this yellow perch pattern, because I've got some yellow perch around me that the smallmouth love to eat. So here is the yellow perch pattern in the 110 and in the 130. You can see that the 130 is quite a bit bigger, but that 110 is kind of a very standard size, if you will. And the last bait that I want to mention, I thought I just got it out. Last bait that I want to mention in this category of jerk baits is the IMA Flit. And I believe this is a 120 size jerk bait, if I'm not mistaken. But the IMA Flit is a really cool bait because, as you can see from this transparent color pattern, this is like a ghost minnow type of pattern. You can see that it's got all of these different rattle chambers that, as I turn it even upside down, you'll see that the BBs are staying in here, staying in here, staying in here. So it's got these triangular rattle compartments, if you will. So there are 3 or 4 different places where the rattles are placed, and then a couple fixed weights in the bait. And so you get this long, narrow profile in IMA flip, and it does dive a little bit deeper than the other two that I just mentioned, but it's the sound more than anything that does the trick with this bait. So um, you certainly could upsize your hooks a little bit on this bait, but they're great hooks, stock straight out of the pack. This is the most affordable bait of the 3 that I'm mentioning, and is the least talked about as well. But the reason that I like the sound is this is almost like a crossover bait where you get the profile and the action of a jerk bait, but with the sound of more of a lipless crankbait. So when you cast that thing out there, you don't get the weight transfer system that you do out of other baits. The weight is fixed, so it's not going to cast quite as well. But when you start reeling this thing to get it down to depth, it's going to make a racket and be quite a bit louder than the other ones on that initial part of the retrieve. And then as you rip it, it has just a totally different sound to it than the other ones. And there's something about it. So that is the jerkbait category. You know, we could talk about the Lucky Craft pointer, but I'm going to leave that one out for this conversation. And partly just because I'm a huge fan of three hook jerk baits, and in my opinion, that's more in the realm of must have than 2 hook jerk baits. But that's perhaps a hot take. I don't know what you guys think about that, but Real Funny Fishing says, anyone try the Signal Devil Swimmer? I don't think so, dude. What the heck is the Signal Devil Swimmer? That sounds like it's not real. The Signal Devil Swimmer. I see the hookup has it, and it looks like a Magdraft style bait. Uh, Not totally surprised by that. A 6-inch and a 7-inch, 20 and 23 bucks. I would go with that 7-inch for sure. But I don't know that it's got a magnet system or what. Hard to tell. But no, I have not fished that. That real bass color looks sick. Looks interesting for sure. Um, in fact, in Japan, that style bait is fairly common. You know, here in the US, it's like people think the Magdraft is revolutionary uh, because there's not a lot of baits like it here. But over in Japan, there's actually a lot of baits with that style. And so, yeah, it's interesting for sure. Matt says, no, I haven't tried that. Signal swim bait looks cool, though. Hard to get. Got it. Matt says, I think you'd like the Depths Bali Song jerkbait. It has a unique sound to it when you twitch it. It's got a big profile, but not too big. Yeah, I've heard of it, but not enough about it to really want to get it or try it. Isn't that like a $30 jerkbait? Of course, I could get a couple of them, but I just haven't gotten around to it. Haven't heard enough about the bait to really want to get it at this point. You know, there are a couple of other baits that I didn't mention that that I have gotten because I was curious about them because I heard good things, um, but did not mention tonight because I haven't put enough time into them. Don't really know enough about the bait or what makes it all that unique. You know, it kind of came onto my radar and strong enough to where I picked it up and then did not get enough attention from me until you know, up until this point. So it's just kind of sitting in my box um, for no apparent reason. You said they're like $1 more than the 110 jerkbait. Okay. Well, I'll check them out. Chicken fried steak in the house, my man. Well, what's up in Central California? How you doing? I don't stunt says, what bait are we talking about? The Depths Bali song. It's a jerk bait, a slightly different profile. But let's move on to uh, category number 3, and we're gonna do hard baits for a little while here, for like these first 5 or 6 categories. Um, Crankbaits are really what I want to talk about least because I have probably the least amount of experience in fishing JDM crankbaits. So we're just going to brush over that. Um, Maybe mention a couple, at least that I have experience with or am really excited to try. But that's probably my area of least expertise. So number 3 is a lipless crankbait. All right, and I've got 3 or 4 in this category that I want to mention specifically, but the one that takes the cake for me in terms of being most interesting and being a must-have for the same reason that I mentioned one of the other baits a couple of minutes ago is this bait right here. Do you guys know what bait this is? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is the IMA Suspending Vibe or Suspending Vibration. I'm not exactly sure which they call it. Suspending Vibe, perhaps. It doesn't say on the bait itself, but this is a really cool bait and really one of like maybe a handful at most, but one of 2 suspending lipless crankbaits that I own. This and the 6th Sense suspending Quake, which is an 80 millimeter bait. So I believe the suspending Vibe from IMA is a 70 millimeter lipless crankbait. Uh, got a fairly normal profile, a little bit of a hump here and a skinny tail, but it's got a fat nose and body. So you'll notice that from the underside that this is a pretty fat bait, and that doesn't affect a lot. It pushes just a little bit more water than most, but you'll hear this has a fairly simplified rattle system so that there's more air inside the bait. There's really just a couple of BBs inside the bottom of this bait. I think there's 3 steel balls in there. But this bait suspends at 3 to 4 feet deep. So you get a very similar action in terms of what it does as the 6th Sense bait, but this thing will nose down a little bit, not quite as aggressive as the 6th Sense bait, but it has that traditional lipless crankbait action, but you can stop it and it will stop on a dime, just where it is. That thing's not going to then immediately start falling and like some baits plummet to the bottom or some baits flutter down. This thing will just swim and stop, swim and stop. Or you can rip it up, and then start swimming it, and it will kind of crank its way back down to some 3 or 4 feet deep. So the IMA Suspending Vibe is a very cool lipless crankbait that I think everybody needs to have. You'll see that the weight is here in the nose section, which leads it to run at about a 45-degree angle. So awesome lipless crankbait there. And one of not that many JDM lipless crankbaits that I have. After that, I pretty much go to Lucky Craft and Jackal. So Um, Lucky Craft, it's hard to say whether Lucky Craft falls into the category of being JDM or not because of what I mentioned earlier. They are a Japanese lure manufacturer, but their baits oftentimes are made for the U.S. domestic market. So the LV500 is perhaps their most well-known lipless crankbait. Brass and glass, super loud rattle system. 3/4 ounce, 3-inch long bait. Tons of weight up in the nose, and this thing will sit nose down on the bottom. A very good bait for yo-yoing or for burning, but not as much fishing steady through the middle of the water column because of how heavy it is. So the version of it that makes my list, surprisingly, is the Lucky Craft LV150. And I just picked a couple of these up in the off season, and they're both in my Go box upstairs in the garage right now. So I don't have them to show you, but I've talked about them a number of times in the last month or two, and I definitely like the way that they run. The cool thing about them is that you can cover a different portion of the water column with the LV150 than you can with the LV500. They make like 3 or 4 different baits in the line of LV lipless crankbaits from Lucky Craft, but the LV150 is that traditional size lipless crankbait that is about 2.5 inches long and a half ounce in weight. So it still casts a mile, does remarkably well at casting, but it will run in that middle or even middle upper portion of the water column and allow you to fish for fish that are sitting in that like 3 to 6 feet of water a whole lot more effectively than you can with the LV500, which is more traditionally known as a deep water lipless crankbait or a bottom bouncing lipless crankbait. So it's very difficult to fish an LV500 high in the water column unless you are truly burning the thing in. So that's a tricky thing for me. And the reason that I picked the LV150. Now, on the same note, if you will, I want to mention, and I do have one of the LV150 sitting here. Ow. Come on, man. Get off my hooks. So this is the LV150, and I'll just show you side by side with the LV500. So what you get is the difference between a 3-inch bait and a 2.5-inch bait, but more specifically a 3/4 ounce bait and a half-ounce bait. More of a traditional size lipless crankbait with the LV150, and what you get is really the same profile. You can see it's a bit more narrow, the LV150, but you get the same exact body design as its big brother, just a little bit slimmed down. So there you go. LV Max 500, LV 150. Okay, same conversation. So I'm not going to go through everything about it, but is the Jackal TN 70 and 60. So the 70 is the more traditional size that most people fish. And it is a little bit closer to that LV500 size. It weighs 5/8 of an ounce. I believe it's 3 inches in length, but Don't quote me on that. But what I put on the list instead of the TN70 is the TN60. So same exact conversation here. You get the same bait and you get the same action just in a smaller profile. Oh, this is the disc knocker. I didn't realize that this TN60 is the disc knocker, the one knocker version of that, but I would say the traditional is my kind of starting point, not the one knocker or the disc knocker, if you will. So last lipless crankbait that I want to mention, and I've only got it in their biggest size, but I know that they make it now in like 4 or 5 different sizes. Um, and this is the Duo Realis Apex Vibe lipless crankbait. So this bait has a relatively narrow profile for the size of the bait. I've got this thing now in 3 or 4 different color patterns. The other couple are over there, not sitting here. I've just got this one sitting right in front of me because I picked it up like a month or 2 ago. Haven't fished it yet, but this bait, designed by Aaron Martins, is massive. This is a 4-inch lipless crankbait that weighs like an eighth and not quite a quarter, and it runs fairly nose down. Okay, has a tight wiggle to it, and tends to do best on like a straight retrieve. I don't do a lot of varying the way that I'm working this bait. Occasionally, if I feel grass or I feel something funny, I will kind of just pop it and make that thing rise up. But otherwise, I'm pretty much swimming this thing straight through the water, and I find that because of that nose down posture, that it stays relatively weedless. It's got super sticky, sharp hooks on it, and is just a very high quality, well designed bait in the Duo Realis Apex Vibe. So, sorry to mention 4 lipless crankbaits there, but for me, the IMA Suspending Vibe takes the cake at number 1, followed by the Lucky Craft LV150, the Jackal TN60, and the Duo Realis Apex Vibe series of lipless crankbaits. Matt says the IMA Shaker flat side is a great crank as well. Yep. As I said, I'm not really going to talk about crankbaits because it's such a broad category, and also a category that I have the least amount of experience with compared to these other baits that we're talking about tonight. So category number 4, we're moving to top waters, and this is going to be walking baits. Okay. Before we do so, quick little note. I'm switching to a bourbon, and this is a new bourbon to me. Was recommended at the liquor store just last week. It's called Blue Note Crossroads. This is I believe it's a Kentucky bourbon. No, Memphis, Tennessee whiskey, but they call it a straight bourbon whiskey. Toasted French oak. This is a 100 proof. And I don't think it even says how long it was aged for, but this thing is really, really well rounded. For me, a 100 proof bourbon is kind of an ideal range to be at. I find that 90 proof bourbons tend to just be lacking a little bit, are cut too much for my liking. But anything north of like 110 or 115 in proof tend to just be burners. A little spicy for my liking most of the time. So, in my eyes, if I'm trying something new, 100 proof is a great way to start. I can drink this thing neat with no ice, and it's delicious. So, you get both the spice and the sweetness straight off the nose, and this is a really good bourbon. So, if you don't already know about Blue Note, check them out. What's up, Bruce Nichols? Ryan S. Yo, I had the Jackal 50. It's a good crappie bait. Interesting. Yeah. The TN50 is a tiny little bait, and I picked it up in the off season for pan fishing and for future ice fishing escapades. Really tiny bait. Um, I do throw micro-sized lipless crankbaits specifically for multi-species fishing. So you'll see in this section of this box right here, I've got all lipless crankbaits that are downsized. And, you know, I've got Rippin' Wraps from Rapala. I've got Tiny Traps from Bill Lewis. I've got the Cordell, the Spot in the small size. I've got the Yozuri Rattling Vibe in their tiny little size. A couple of others of small lipless crankbaits that I like to throw. So I agree. I think it would make an awesome crappie, bluegill, trout type of bait. Um, even yellow perch, and then of course bass as well. But yeah, good comment there. Bruce says I spent 4 days at my brother's fishing 13 bass and lost one. Had to be 5 pounds at the bank. Leader snapped. Dang, dude, that's brutal. Well, sorry to hear that, but still 13 bass is nice for sure. Right on, man. Good to hear. All right, so walking baits are up next. And I hate to say it, but I pretty much have to pee already. So I'm going to make it through this category of walking baits first before I give myself a chance to pee. And we talk about poppers after that. So we're going to do 3 topwater categories. We're going to do walking baits, poppers, and frogs before we do just a couple crankbaits and then move on to a few soft plastics. But we've already talked about some of these denser categories, if you will. But walking baits, the number one on my list. Can you guess it? Evergreen shower blows, specifically in the 125 size. Now, this is a family of baits, right? They make this thing in 4 different sizes now. And so, in my opinion, these 2 middle sizes are really the deal because you're going to get both numbers, size, and you've still got 3 treble hooks on them. But the 125 is like the standard walking bait size. The 105 is like the standard junior size. But I think they're both phenomenal baits. You get the same action and a similar sound, just a higher pitch and a slightly more subtle action, as you would suspect in the 105 than out of the 125, due to just the size of the bait. In general, you know, everything is scaled down. So the ass is a lot smaller, the nose is a lot skinnier. So you're not going to displace as much water with the 105 size. So the 125 for me is wicked. Now, this is not your traditional walking bait that you're going to use to cover a lot of water. This is a pencil popper, and so it is really going to bridge the gap where you're going to fish it faster than you would a popper, but slower than you would a traditional walking bait. So if you fish this faster, it will walk and move forward a little bit, but really this excels most when you walk it slowly, and this thing will just literally almost turn all the way around. this thing will turn just about 180 and walk in place. It covers very little water if you walk it right and you walk it slowly. So it throws a lot of water, and it has a big presence in the water as well. So the shower blows probably tops the list for me, but not 100%. Okay. Number two, well, there's no particular order to 2, 3, and 4 on my list here, but let's just go with all of them at the same time so that none of them feel butthurt about it. Keep in mind, with all of these categories, I'm leaving a bunch of baits out. So, number 2 on my list is going to be the Lucky Craft Sammy. On the opposite end of the spectrum as what you just got with the shower blows. The Sammy is meant to fish faster and have a more subtle action on the surface of the water. It's got this more like banana type of shape and just a subtle cup on the mouth. So this does not throw a lot of water. It has a very smooth walk to it, and it covers a fair amount of water. So this is a bait that you can fish a bit quicker and cover more water. Now, one thing I don't love about the Sammy is that it's got 2 treble hooks on it, stock out of the pack. So I like the fact that they have updated the Sammy and come out with a newer version that is slightly smaller, the Sammy 105 instead of the 115 that has 3 treble hooks on it. And does essentially have the same profile, same action, is a great bait for sure. And it's cheaper too. So it's made just a little bit differently, and I think it might be made for the US market. But anyway, the Sammy is probably right there at number 2 on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of walking baits. The Gunfish from Lucky Craft is probably on that list as well. You get just a little bit more of a knocker sound than the BB sound that you get with the Sammy. You get that hybrid sound with the Gunfish. And this is kind of a middle of the road type of bait where you can fish it slowly and walk it a little bit more like you would with, say, the shower blows, or faster and get kind of a halfway in between that and the Sammy. So the Gunfish is a really cool bait. Been a top producer for a long, long time. Great bait with the Lucky Craft Gunfish. And then last one worth mentioning, I've talked about this a few times recently because I did pick a couple more of these up from Discount Tackle last month. And this is the Evergreen JT or Justine. Specifically in the 115, but I also do like the 95 size of it, which I thought I had just sitting right here. But whatever, doesn't matter. The Evergreen JT, if you'll notice, this thing, well, it's sharp, but it's dead silent. There are no rattles in this bait. So occasionally you want a bait that is going to be very smooth in the water, have that walk a little bit more like that of the Sammy, and this has no cupped face on it. So this is going to be the smoothest walking of the bunch, and you can work this thing very quickly and it will skitter on the surface, cover a lot of water, and it's silent too. So it's literally just all about the visual and the presence in the water that the Justine has, as opposed to the acoustics and fish being able to hear it coming from a ways away. So walking bait is category number 4. Evergreen Shower Blows 125 is really my go-to bait and what I would consider the most must have, but the other ones that I fish the most are the Lucky Craft Gunfish, the Lucky Craft Sammy, and the Evergreen Justine or JT. I don't stunt says just don't miss the bowl like last time. Yeah, I was peeing in a tiny cup, or maybe I was peeing in one cup and then had to swap over to another mid pee. So that's why I missed. So hopefully I don't run into that issue now, but I do have to go. So I'll be right on the other side of the camera and I'll be back in 30 or 40 seconds. Ooh. It's not a bowl, but I did kind of half miss it for a second there. Man. All right. No, I didn't fix the alarm system. I went outside before this stream and I checked. Um, I checked on uh my box outside. There is not a switch that I can flip to stop that freaking clicking. Uh, guys, I am sorry if you hear it. That my alarm system is still clicking, and I don't know why. I pulled all sorts of cords, cut them, ruined the whole wiring of it before last week's stream with Matt, and still didn't get her done. And someone suggested in last week's stream that I just go out uh, to the box and flip the switch to cut the power to that security system, and I swear it's not wired in to the box, so I have no idea what to do with it. Marco says if you shake it more than 2 times, you're playing with it. Yeah, I hear you. I think I shook it maybe 2.5 times. All right, my bad. Dustin says I was always told to throw them when it's rough. Super spook. I assume you're talking about the shower blows. Yeah, the Super Spook is one that I used to throw quite a bit more. Um, do not throw quite as frequently now because I tend to go to these JDM baits or other similar style baits as a Super Spook, just that are a little bit more refined, have a different sound profile, a little bit different action. And there are a bunch of them that I use that just kind of get the nod for me quicker than the Super Spook. But yes, in general, if you're throwing a Super Spook and it's not doing the trick, then sure, slow down and go to a shower blows. It's just not going to cover as much water as a Super Spook, and it's not going to travel as wide either. Matt says, I just use the Rio Rico and the Yellow Magic Havanas. Yeah, I know you do. We talked about that last week. I don't know if I necessarily consider the Rio Rico uh, Japanese. I think it's American, if we're being honest, isn't it? Is Labina a Japanese company or is it not? So let's talk about poppers for a second here. There are a few poppers that make my list, and there's a couple of reasons for that. But let me catch up on these comments real quick. Tom says, joining late. I passed out for a few. No, it wasn't a nap. I don't do naps. That's funny. Well, cheers to you, Tom. Hope you're having a great night. Happy Friday. Mark, I tried to shut the breaker off. It's not on the panel, dude. I don't stunt already knows. So the Rio Rico is Japan, says Daniel. Well, it's not on this short list, okay? Technically, it could replace one of these that I'm going to mention, but I like them both, so it doesn't quite matter which we talk about. But I will say the Megabass Pop Max probably gets the #1 spot for me, even though last year I had slightly more success on its baby brother in the Pop X. So, you get a much smaller profile in the Pop X than you get in the Pop Max. The Pop Max is a really fat topwater popper. The Pop X is a lot more traditional as a popper. But both of them throw a lot of water. Both of them have the gills that allow for a bubble trail because the water passes through the gills, and it's unique, right? It throws a lot of water. It doesn't make the most standard blooping sound, but really good bait. I fished the Pop X on more of a traditional blooping style retrieve. It's got that kind of quieter rattle system on it. And I believe it was this color that did the trick for me last year. I don't even remember what they call this. This is a JDM color. And yeah, it did really well for me. But the Pop Max, I think, is really cool because of what you can do with it. Not only does it have more presence in the water than really most poppers out there, it's really right up there with the Rebel P70. I mean, they're giant poppers, okay? And the P70 and the Rebel Pop R is a little bit more nichey of a bait. It sits really far down in the water and needs to just be blooped slowly in the water. But the Pop Max has a slightly different posture, can be fished a little bit quicker, and then can more methodically be walked. So you can switch your style of retrieve throughout while fishing that bait. So the Pop Max really is my one must-have JDM popper. Okay. After the Pop Max and the Pop X from Megabass, I would go to the Yellow Magic Magnum popper. I had some good success on this bait last year. This is a similar bait to the Rio Rico and to the Don Iovino Splash It. All three baits have essentially the same blink. And, I've talked about this before, but I can show you them side by side if you'd like. I fished this bone color a bit last year and got some good success, good results on it straight out of the pack. But I have not fished this other color that is more clear with that red nose on it. You can see that it's got these 3 chambers in it, okay? And what you'll notice is that there's different size balls in each of the chambers. You get really the biggest one is in this back one, slightly smaller in the front, and then you get 2 smaller beads in the middle one. Okay, and so That's the sound that you get with the Yellow Magic. The Don Iovino Splash It has the same design with 3 chambers, big ball in the back, medium sized ball in the front, and 2 beads in the middle. Essentially the same bait. Little bit louder with the Yellow Magic than with the Don Iovino, but I mean, gosh, they're essentially the same bait, okay? And neither one come with amazing terminal tackle on them, whereas the Rio Rico comes with awesome split rings and hooks straight out of the pack. What you'll notice about this bait is that it's got the 3 chambers, but it has nothing in the middle, and then it's got like brass balls in the front and the back, and I think they're the same size. So you get just a little bit more of a knocker type of rattle sound with the Rio Rico, but the blank is pretty much the same on all 3 of them. So I was going to mention the Yellow Magic just because I've fished it more than the other 2, and I fished it more like a traditional popper. But like I mentioned with Matt last week, Rick Clun suggests that with this Rio Rico and the angle of that nose and how it's already at kind of that shaved bottom, it's not all that concave, that this is a bait that you can and should fish very quickly on the surface, moving along fast. Okay, a little bit unconventional and a way that most people would not associate with a popper style bait, but something to think about. And one last popper that makes the list for me because I like it and because I had good success on it last year is the Evergreen One Bug or OB68. I've got this thing in like 4 or 5 different colors as of right now. I lost 1 or 2 of them last year, so I've picked up a couple more going into this season. But this is an awesome little bait. Listen to that high pitch rattle in it. You've got that steep face on it. However, it does have a pretty deep cup, so it bloops really well. It walks fairly well, and it's got awesome finishes on it. It's got that unique belly that you get out of most of the evergreen baits, like on the shower blows. That has just a whole lot of flake and flash on it. Like here's the JT. It's got this rough finish. And that's not showing all that well in this light right now. And I apologize for that. Maybe this one will show a little bit better. Just a hair. But you get a lot of sparkle. You get a rough finish on the bottom of all of the evergreen baits. So the One Bug is definitely one worth considering. Of course, here's that JT in the 95. You can see just how much flash this thing puts off. All right, so poppers are over with, and we'll move on to the next category. Dustin says the Sugoi Splash. Wish I had a lot more of them. Interesting. Sugoi Splash? What the heck is that? Yamamoto popper, huh? I don't know that I'm familiar with that bait. Looks pretty good though. Marco says the Yozuri 3D popper. Um, I prefer, honestly, if we're going in that family of baits, I really prefer the the dual hardcore popper. And a couple reasons for it. It's got a magnetic weight transfer system in it. Casts really well, bloops really well. This is a bait that, and it's got a side to side subtle rattle system. It's got a different springy type of sound to it that that is really cool. But I didn't mention this about the IMA baits, but I will now because the dual hardcore baits and Yozuri all kind of fit into this unique category of what I would consider affordable JDM lures. Uh, Honestly, like $10 per bait. Uh, just a fantastic value. So you got to look into them for sure. Chicken Fried Steak says not much confidence in a popper. Always throw a whopper plopper over a popper. See, you're gonna throw them in different situations, and that it took me a couple years to figure that out as well. Um, but when you know that a topwater bite is going to be on, I would fish a plopper first to find the fish and to get the initial bite or first couple of bites, mixing up your retrieve in order to kind of clean up a little bit, get a couple more bites where you can. But before moving spots, if you know you're on top of fish or you're getting bit frequently, then slow down and go to a popper. There's just something about the action of a popper that is more subtle, more realistic um, than that of a whopper plopper that fish will go nuts over if they're in a feeding mode. Um, Also, you want to fish poppers in high percentage areas, not just when you know they're eating, but say if you've got a lay down tree, if you're right over a point or a rock pile, something like that, where you know that there are fish that tend to hang out there or live there year round, or where you get bit frequently, that's a good place to throw a popper instead of a whopper plopper straight out of the gate. So keep that in mind. That's something that this past year I definitely learned my lesson there and gained a lot of confidence in a popper over a whopper plopper, and and a big reason why I built out my popper box big time in the last year or 2 years. Matt says I gotta try that. What, just burning the Rio Rico? Yeah, that's something that I want to do more of this year as well. And I think we should all compare notes. If you've got Rio Ricos, try doing that when you know that fish are eating. Instead of throwing a walking bait, instead of throwing a popper and working it slowly, just make a long cast and just work that thing quick so that it's moving in a straight line and coming back to you quickly. Just kind of steady reeling it and popping your rod uh, so that that thing is splashing and spitting water, but coming back to you on a straight line, not walking, not blooping, but spitting, if that makes sense. Um, Marcos says chicken fried steak, they might sound the same, but you use it at two different types of fishing, even though they're uh, okay. Thank you for answering that question before I did. But yeah, chicken fried steak says, what rod do you throw poppers on? How about you guys in the chat? 7 foot, medium, moderate. Um, yeah, sometimes even a little bit shorter. It depends on the size of the bait that I'm throwing. If I'm throwing a popper that is the smaller quarter-ounce size, I will often throw it on spinning gear. So more like a 6'6", medium, fast. Otherwise, no, you're right. I am going to be throwing it on a bait caster that's like, either my jerkbait setup or my crankbait setup. So the two differences there that double as top water setups for me are a 610 medium moderate, uh, or a 7 foot medium moderate. Uh, Daiwa calls it a medium power regular action, but yes, essentially anywhere from a 610 to a 7 foot. I find that the 610 is a little bit easier to work because with a popper, I prefer to work it down than to the side. Um, a jerk bait, I can work to the side a little bit more easily, but with a popper, I find that if I'm wanting to make that blooping sound more so than walk the bait, uh, I do want to be able to work the bait down as opposed to the side most of the time. Not always true though. Marco says, top water, I mean the popper, you can let it sit in the bass's face all the time you want. Yeah, for sure. I don't stunt says, do you use any spy baits? I have a couple, but I don't, honestly. Talked about it recently. Actually, first fish of the year for me this year came on a soft plastic version of a spy bait, effectively. This is more of like a homemade rig of mine. So here I've got a swim bait that is perhaps a little too long, but still does the trick just fine, even with this single hook. So this is a Megabass Okashira screw head, and this is a 3.8-inch Kitech swim bait that I have cut the tail off of and screwed in the tail this Zapu Para R uh, piece of terminal tackle. So here's what they look like. It is just a blade with a screw on it and then a bead in between the screw and the blade. Really cool concept here with the Para R. And so same exact deal. You're just going to want to swim this thing straight through the water column, depending on where in the water column you want to fish or where you think the fish are hanging out. But yeah, same deal. I mean, it's mostly for suspended fish. I don't throw a spy bait all that frequently, but I do throw prop baits on top some, but I generally go to a whopper plopper before a metal style prop bait. Matt says, only spy bait I use is the Depths Calling Hustler. Interesting. A 1 ounce spy bait. You don't have to worry about using super light line. 14 to 16 pound line. I got you. Kid Iraq Ray in the house. Yo, bro. You fished Hartwell yesterday. Nice. Happened to actually have a Yozuri walking bait. Uh, Tore it up on top water with it. Nice, dude. That sounds awesome. Super happy for you. Best thing about a popper is its ability to stay in one place over your target. Agreed. Definitely prefer a walking bait popper on a fly rod, though. Yeah. I mean, I don't throw poppers on fly rods all that frequently. I have some, but I find that that action is quite a bit more subtle when throwing like a popper style fly than you know a hard plastic popper lure uh, on a spinning setup or even a bait caster. If I'm using a bait caster, I'll step up my line size a little bit more. Usually, I'm throwing like 10 or 12 pound monofilament leader. I'll throw a braid to a leader the vast majority of the time when I'm throwing top water. Um, Whereas on a spinning setup, I might go as low as 8 pound, but yeah, still might go as high as 12 pound. sometimes 15 pound if it's like the Pop Max. I Don't Stunt says I put a Colorado blade on the same place that you put the tail spinner uh, on my flukes. Wait, wait a second. What'd you say? I put a Colorado blade the same place you put the tail spinner on my flukes. So do you cut the tail off of your flukes or what? And wouldn't that affect the action of a fluke? A fluke is a soft plastic jerkbait. It's supposed to dart back and forth. So if you cut the tail off, it's not going to have the same action. If you add weight to the back of it and you put a blade on, it's not going to have the same type of action. So are you just straight swimming that then through the water, or are you still fishing it like you would a fluke? What are you doing with that bait at that point? Yeah, you cut the tail off and use it as a drop shot bait. Interesting. Yeah, I rarely do something like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I do that with. The closest thing would be doing that with like a worm, right? Where I'd actually put a blade in the tail end of the worm. And so then if I'm fishing it on a wacky rig or a Texas rig, sorry, not a wacky rig, but a Nico rig or a Texas rig, where I'm actually going to bring that bait up and then let it fall back down on a Texas rig, then that blade is going to have more action. If I'm fishing it on a Nico rig and I'm pulling the bait up, then you get the action on the pull and a little bit less so on the fall. So I don't do that as much uh, with flukes, but that's interesting. Okay, so let's move on to the next category, and that is frogs, I believe. We just talked about walking baits and poppers, right? So let's talk about frogs. There were just a couple of frogs that I want to talk about specifically. Um, so two soft body frogs and or hollow body frogs, if you will, and one um, soft plastic toad. So hollow body frogs. First on the list is the evergreen shower blows frog. Okay. What you'll notice about this thing, not only do they look awesome and you get that fur on the tail, but you get a longer profile out of this bait. This thing is over 3 inches in length, and the hook is designed perfectly around this body. So it's extremely weedless, but it's got a really soft collapsible body and super sticky sharp hooks that are already pointed up. Keep that in mind. But most importantly, what you get out of this bait is that shower blows nose. So this thing walks really well in place. So it makes a commotion, it spits water. You get that secondary action from the tail, and you get a remarkable hookup ratio and a large profile. So the evergreen shower blows frog makes the list for me in terms of must have JDM frogs. Uh, Really cool concept, and essentially a way that you can fish a shower blows up um, where it needs to be weedless, right? So shower blows. And just like with most frogs, I'd recommend that you throw something with a white belly, something with a black belly, something with a little bit more funky, clear chartreuse to it. So kind of got my bases covered with these three for the most part. Now, second bait that I want to mention is the Jackal Kara. And this was like a close second because the Kara is a really small bodied frog. If I show you these two side by side, take a look at just how much smaller the Kara is compared to the evergreen frog. I mean, it looks tiny in comparison. So where you get a big popping style frog that's going to walk in place, here you get a walking style frog. It's got that wide body to it, but it's a really short profile and it's got that pointed nose, so this thing will be able to walk and cover just a little bit more water than say a popping frog will. Um, and it's bite size, so you get a lot of fish that will eat this, and you get a nice combination of durability and hookup ratio on this frog for being as small as it is. So again, black, white for the most part. I do have a couple of other colors in this bait, which I don't know if they're sitting here or elsewhere. Now, here's that awesome bluegill color, a little bit more, see-through, sparkle to it, a little bit of a hint of orange. But the Jackal Kara also makes my list. Uh, Now, the last one is a soft plastic toad. Okay. And JDM is relative on this one because it's very available, but I guess all of these baits that I'm mentioning right now fit into that. So I've talked about this bait before, but this is the Kitech Noisy Flapper. And this is a toad that is just a little bit unlike the rest of the toads on the market. And you see I've got a box full of toads here. Um, I've got the Zoom horny toad, I've got the Stanley ribbit, I've got the Strike King, rage tail toad bait. I've got a bunch of different toads, and I've got a couple more that I'm going to pick up soon. But this bait right here is awesome. And what you'll notice is that a new bait that just came out, the Savage Gear Duratech Toad, which I am going to pick up soon, is designed profile wise a lot after this bait. So, uh, first thing to notice is the shape of the nose coming down to the body. This thing will run very true and slowly on the surface of the water. And part of that is the design of the shape of the bait, and the other part is the consistency of the plastic on this thing. So you get a dual density soft plastic in this bait so that it does not roll over, it runs true, and it stays up high so you can fish it slower. So really cool bait there. Um, it technically is meant to be run on an EWG style hook. You've got that hook slot on top of the bait. However, you have these ridges on the back of the bait that kind of come in at a V-shaped angle so that you can rig this thing very easily on a double frog hook. And I'll show you right now. This is the Stanley double take hook, which is really designed to go with the Stanley top toad, which is a hollow bodied soft plastic toad, which is an awesome bait. But we're talking about JDM baits right now. So you're gonna take this screw keeper, which this is one of the best screw keepers on the market, by the way, because it actually is narrower at the nose. When you first go into the bait, it's super narrow, and then it gets thicker as you go in. And not only does it hold baits well, but it threads on very well. So screw this bad boy straight up on and into the bait. And then when you rig this double frog hook, you can just bend and bring the frog hook around the bait. And instead of just laying on top of the bait like so, what you can do is pull it back and expose these hook points into these ridges. And wow, this version of this hook is actually a little bit this is the smaller version of it. I didn't realize that. So um, you're gonna want a slightly bigger hook than this one that you're seeing here, because it's gonna look a little bent. But the point that I want to make is that you can tuck the points of the hooks into these ridges and have this thing run super weedless. This is not the right size hook. I thought it was. They make this double take hook in a couple of different sizes, and in the bigger size, it runs a little bit wider. So what I could do is bend this hook out right now. Kind of hard to do with this hook, but you can tuck it in and it remains a little bit more weedless than what you get with a single hook, and you get a slightly better hookup ratio. The other thing that I've mentioned about this bait before is that not only do you get a really realistic toad and frog action with those big flanges and a really aggressive kicking. So awesome as a standalone toad, awesome on the back of a buzz bait, but also check this out. When you look at it like this, do you not also see from the side that this can be an awesome craw imitator as opposed to a toad? So here it looks like a toad, but here it looks like a craw. So you can throw this thing on the back of a jig or a chatterbait. You get a very bulky trailer and one that will affect the buoyancy of your bait just a little bit. Really cool bait that you get in the Kitech Noisy Flapper. Okay, that's the last frog bait that I want to mention. And definitely one that's underrated and people don't talk about for whatever reason. There's a lot of different ways to rig that. It's an awesome buzzbait trailer. A lot of people throw toads on the back of buzzbaits, and for good reason. But that bait right there, the Kitech Noisy Flapper, is sweet. Kitech makes a lot of really good soft plastic baits. There's one more that I'm going to mention, maybe two, in the next few minutes because we got just a couple more sections to talk about. Crankbaits, we're just going to kind of blow through once I catch up on these comments, and I apologize for not being on them. Chicken Fried Steak says they call it a got shot in Colorado rig. I don't know what you're talking about, but sorry about that. Ray says also got my first treble hook in my thumb down to the barb. Damn, dude. Yeah, now you know how I feel. Had to push it through my thumb. Borrowed wire cutters from a dock owner, cut it off and pulled it out. Landed the fish and kept fishing. My man. Nice. See, I wish I could have pushed mine through my thumb. It was so far straight into my thumb that when I tried coming back out, the closest I could get was just to about the tip. It was not easy for me to push it through at all. Actually, I mean that was what I wanted to be able to do, but was unable to do. So, congratulations on getting your first hook stuck past the barb. That's hilarious. Matt says, Tyler, have you ever seen those decoy underspin slash drop shot weights that have a small spinner blade on them? I have a couple, and they're meant for saltwater, but they have light weights, and you can use them freshwater. A drop shot weight with a spinner blade on them? No, I have not. I've definitely seen the newer drop shot weights that have come out with that have rattles built into them, and that looks cool for sure. But but I don't know about drop shot weights with a spinner blade on. That's interesting. And Ray says, I think I'm going to try the Spro Pop and Frog this year. Yeah, that's a great bait for sure. You know, we're talking about JDM baits tonight, but the Spro Bronzeye Pop and Frog is right there at the top of the list for me when it comes to popping frogs. If you're going to throw a Spro Frog, I think the poppin' is the way to go for sure. Couple of other good popping frogs that you should consider while at it. Terminator makes a really good one. And you know, you probably have already tried the 6 Sense Vega frog is a good one, no doubt. And then one that you're not going to want to spend the money on is the Megabass Big Gabbit or Big Gabot. You get a larger profile with that frog. So anyway, the Spro Bronzeye, especially in like the 60 size, is underrated. I mean, it's hard to say it's underrated because it's a very popular frog, but yeah, good idea, and you definitely should get it. Batra X Frog from Megabass is one I need to check out, says Matt. It was engineered very well, and it's very versatile. The Nori's NF60 walks super easy. Bob's up and down on the walk. Yeah, I don't love the up and down bob as much, but the Nori's NF60, huh? I might check it out, but the Megabass Batra X, I feel like I've checked out before, but I don't remember enough about it. Appreciate you mentioning it though. It says my connection is unstable. Am I good? Am I good? Hello? Hello? I did freeze for a second, guys. Am I okay? Leave a comment. I'm back. Okay. Sorry about that. Yikes. A doodle. Poppin' pad crasher. Good. Regular pad crasher. Good. Unrated baits. Perhaps. Uh, Definitely still one of the most popular frogs out there, but really good. Sorry that I disappeared for a second, and thank you all for still hanging out while I just went. So, my bad. I don't know what happened. My connection was unstable for a second there. Let's move on to next section. Dustin says, I have a bunch of the Gavacho frogs. Can't keep fish buttoned on them like you'd think with those hooks. Yeah, I don't know if it's the hooks or what, but I've also had a slightly worse hookup ratio on the Gavacho than with the Kara. I think it has to do a little bit with the body and the hook shape. You know, what you'll notice is that the hooks don't run as high relative to the body. So that plus the body is a little bit more stiff, has to be compressed all the way down. So, they're already up at an angle, but it's like they need to be bent out a little bit from the body in order to be able to get fish, because this bait is extremely weedless as it is, and you could probably afford to bend them out and potentially up a little bit more than they come stock. You'll notice that a lot of other baits come straight out of the package with hooks that already grab you and that are right there at the top of the frog and are already right at the edges. So, technically speaking, that's a little bit more appropriate, especially if the body is not super collapsible and the gavacho lacks a little bit in that area. You said grab in the bluegill as well. The white is stiffer. No, this is the bluegill. Still pretty dang stiff, dude. It's the plastic on the gavacho that has that issue. So the hook is designed around this body, and it doesn't come to the top of the body, and it's tucked in quite a bit. So I would consider bending those out and potentially up a little bit more. All right, crankbaits. We're just gonna roll through. There's really two that I want to mention that I think are unique. One is the Lucky Craft Moon Salt series of baits. And I don't have the standard moon salts with me right this second. I don't know where I've got them sitting. I have them in like a unique box of their own with some other baits. But for the sake of just explaining to you what this bait is, I've got one, maybe two of them sitting here in the newer Lucky Craft 1.5 square bill in the Moon Salt version. So if you know the Lucky Craft LC 1.5 is a silent square bill crankbait. They do not make them in a rattling version. I mean, it is a silent bait, right? If you're hearing anything, it's split rings. So the 1.5 square bill is silent, but the Moon Salt series of crankbaits is more of like a bandit type of body. It's a pretty round body, does not have a square bill on it, but they've expanded the Moon Salt concept into other baits. And so what you get is what you can see here, where you get multiple rattle chambers. And essentially, this is what I mentioned with the IMA Flit jerkbait. And what you get is a lipless crankbait sound in a different lure profile. So this is a square bill crankbait, or in the standard Moon Salt series, you get just like a shallow, medium, or deep diving crankbait with more of a round bill, but with the sound of a lipless crankbait. So where you might be ordinarily going through with a silent square bill crankbait, or with a traditional rattle or one knocker sound, this is unlike anything else that is out there, and therefore something that I do recommend that you at least check out or know about. And yeah, so the Moon Salt series of crankbaits from Lucky Craft are super cool, and I'm a big fan of them. Another one that I'll mention that is new to me So I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with it, but it's like a crossover bait as well. This is the Jackal Aragon crankbait, which, as you can see, is jointed and has a round bill, but it makes a racket as these joints hit each other. So this is actually a hybrid between a crankbait and, say, a chatterbait with the sound and vibration that this jointed crankbait puts out. So most jointed crankbaits actually don't make contact with the joints. They're separated far enough to where it's really just an action and a swing of the tail that you get, as opposed to a clacking sound of the body hitting itself as it swings back and forth. So the Jackal Aragon is one that I'm very excited to try this year because it's different. I have a lot of confidence in chatterbaits, but a little less so in crankbaits in general, especially that like medium diving crankbait range. And I think that Jackal Aragon should fill that gap for me and be a really interesting player this year. I've really developed a lot more confidence in shallow diving crankbaits. So two other baits that are new to me, but that I almost immediately have a lot of confidence in are the Depths Evoke. Thanks to Matt, South Jersey fisherman. It was Matt who really turned me on to this bait. This is a square bill crankbait with a pretty steep posture that will perform well on a burn style retrieve and through the thickest of cover. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is the Lucky Craft BDS series of crankbaits. And these all run at different depths. So this is the 2.2 Magic 2.2 series of the BDS. And this thing has a different shaped lip and a different posture that runs a bit more horizontal in the water and is known to run through grass better than most crankbaits on the market. So between the BDS and the Evoke, you kind of really cover your whole spectrum of being able to run through water or wood and grass really well. And then with the Aragon and the Moonsault, you cover your bases of different sounds, um, just an acoustic presence in the water that is unlike really any other crankbait on the market. So that is what I wanted to talk about when it comes to crankbaits. But let's just kind of fly right through that and talk about jigs, and more specifically than jigs is chatterbaits. And there's not a lot that I want to talk about because you guys know as well as I do that I think the jackhammer chatterbait takes the cake. Now, technically speaking, is the JDM version of the jackhammer different than the US version? Maybe, maybe not. It comes in some different colors. Um, the hook might be coated differently or something like that, but it's essentially the same bait. Uh, Z-Man went to Evergreen, or vice versa. They partnered up to bring the jackhammer to the US. So that's a no-brainer of a bait. But the JDM chatterbait that I've mentioned a few times on this channel, I don't mention it frequently because it's already hard enough to get your hands on them. And yep, that is the Kesu Tranquil. Okay, this is a soft blade chatterbait. I don't know of any other bait on the market like this. I might need to pull out my chatterbait box because I don't want to totally fiddle with that. So it does have a direct blade to head connection because this is a JDM bait. But what you'll notice is that this is a soft blade. So instead of a clear hard plastic like you get with the Stealth blade or the Naked Rage blade or something of this sort, this is a chatterbait with a relatively smaller hook. This is like a 3/0, super sticky hook. Comes with a double wire bait keeper, hand tied skirt, awesome, everything. Skips well, and it's got that big gap so that you get a lot of travel on this blade. But this blade has just a different displacement of water, and it is perfectly silent. So where uh, a stealth blade jackhammer is quiet because the blade is smaller and because the blade makes less contact with the head, it displaces water differently than the blade here on the Tranquil. The Tranquil has a bigger blade, but it is a soft blade. So it pushes water in its own unique way, and it's got a cool thump to it. So I'm a fan of this bait, and I don't talk about it much. Oh, Marco says when I'm fishing any crankbait, I fish it with monofilament. Interesting, dude. Oh, when you're fishing it through grass. Okay. Um, yeah, I rarely do, but that's an interesting point. Lucky Strike got the Vibra swing with the free head and the blade is rubber. Mm, are you sure that's not like a Lucky Strike? I feel like that's a different type of bait and more of like a why is it not coming to me? Of course, I used to have him here, but a scrounger. It's a scrounger head, dude. The trickster too. I think it's a scrounger. Okay, it's not the same thing because that's a fixed plastic piece that is just up, right, and it goes back and forth a bit wider. It doesn't have that same vibration as a bladed jig. Man, a scrounger has a much wider swing, and it's a different type of action. Matt, that's a good question. Um, I think it's truly more stealthy and more consistent for me. For me, the Stealth Blade Jackhammer, I think the blade is a little small for what it should be. And I almost wonder if the blade should be turned around the opposite direction on the Stealth Blade. Uh, when you consider the shape of the blade, it almost looks like a diamond from the from the back, right? But then from the front, it's flat. Uh, I kind of wonder what the action would be like if that were flipped around. But this bait, unlike the original jackhammer, which I was comparing it to when I first got this bait, it does not make contact with the head really at all. And then two, because it's using an oval split ring instead of a snap, I find that you don't get as much freedom of movement, and this blade just, it's inconsistent. So it does not move as freely, nearly as well. Whereas with the Tranquil, this bait does have a snap on it, and it has that much bigger, well, I don't know that it's got a bigger um, eye than the Stealth Blade necessarily, but the blade just travels better, and the water pushes around that blade better. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but but it feels so much better in the water just straight out of the gate, and it's quieter too, but it's a lot more steady, and it's a heavier thump. So that doesn't make sense as it's coming out of my mouth, because both baits are meant to be subtle or quiet, if you will, but this still has a little bit of a click to it, yet it does not thump steadily. It comes and goes. You kind of have to re-engage it like you do some of the cheaper chatterbaits, and it doesn't displace as much water because it's a thin and small blade, which is perhaps why it's called the stealth blade. But it's just not as predictable and as consistent as what you get with the jackhammer chatterbait, which is extremely loud, extremely consistent, uh, so predictable. And so the stealth swimmer is more along those lines, where you get that same quick startup. You get that, you can feel it thumping the whole time, but you can't feel it like you can hear it. It's quiet, silent underwater, but it's moving a lot of water. So sorry to sound contradictory, if you will, but we got two more categories, if you will, and these are soft plastics specifically. So I want to talk about drop shots and then miscellaneous soft baits. So specifically for a drop shot, there are two or three baits that I want to mention, and one kind of jumps out at me. Oh my gosh, do I not have it sitting here? I'll freak out. I think they're in the garage. Uh, I mean, I won't actually freak out, but I'm gonna be disappointed. Yo, I thought I had. No. I know I got a pack of them somewhere. I keep these things kind of everywhere with me. There's got to be a pack sitting somewhere. Let's find these hoes without going upstairs, of course. I know there's got to be a pack in here. Yeah, baby. Let's freaking go. All right. So, drop shot baits. I got one here. Yeah, this is just a straight green pumpkin. I like to throw this in a number of different colors, but in terms of a must have JDM soft plastic. And this is for action, price, color selection, kind of a wide variety of stuff. This is the Kitech Easy Shaker. And they make this in a couple of different sizes, maybe as small as 3.5 and as big as 5.5. I'm not sure, but this 4.5-inch size seems to be the deal for me. It comes with that standard Kitech shrimpy smell, which is great. And it comes with usually laminate colors. Okay, so it's a little bit helpful to know what is the top and what is the bottom. This green pumpkin you can't see right now, but I can in the light. I can see what is actually the top and what is the bottom. This side over here is the top, and this side over here is the bottom. Let me see if I can tell based on the top of the bait. There is actually a rigging slot, which you would not be able to see on this camera, but the ribbing that goes all the way around this bait does break up on the rigging slot on top of the bait. So this bait, in my opinion, my opinion, is not meant to be fished on a Texas rig. Although you could fish this thing on, a punch shot, a Jika rig, a shaky head, uh, a Nika rig, wacky rig, kind of whatever you want to do with it. But I think this thing does best on a drop shot, either nose hooked or threaded onto a drop shot. I really, really like this bait. So, one is the profile. It has a slight taper to it. And you see this one's a little bit bent up from being in the package, but most of them don't have that issue. It's not a big problem with these baits, but it has a slight taper and a thin tail to it. Two, the scent, the durability, the salt content are all awesome on this thing. But most importantly, the action on this bait is so underrated. It also has a dual density soft plastic. Like I mentioned with the Kitech toad bait from earlier, this thing sits like perfectly horizontal in the water, which is so hard and rare to find, especially in a drop shot bait. You're either getting a bait that is going to be heavily salted and not buoyant at all, meaning the nose is going to stay up and the tail's going to go down, right? You're going to have to keep working that bait to get the tail to go up, or it's going to be the opposite and it's going to be super buoyant and the nose is going to go down, the tail's going to go up, and it's going to look like a feeding bait fish, although it's on a drop shot. And so it's not going to be on bottom and it's going to look pretty unnatural. And you have to keep working that bait to keep it looking a little bit more natural. But the Easy Shaker from Kitech is a killer bait. I think these run for $5 a pack and you get like 10 in a package. 10 tails. 4.5-inch is my favorite size. Really good bait there. Okay. The other one that I'll mention that I have a little bit less experience with, but I understand is an awesome bait for what it is the Rains bubbling shaker. Now, this is like one of the smaller sizes that they make. So I picked up this bait to be a hybrid drop shot and or Ned rig bait. And for multiple reasons, because this bait, one, has a crazy shape to it. Take a look at that shape. It's got kind of a a keeled, almost pointed belly to it, and back. So it has like a diamond style profile to it. Then it has this taper and then a thicker tail before this little point on it. But it's ribbed pretty heavily, also scented pretty heavily, and this thing catches a lot of water and leaves a lot of bubbles behind it. So hence the name bubbling shaker from Rains. This is meant to be a drop shot bait more than anything, and they make it in multiple sizes that go up to 5 or so inches. But this bait, unlike the Kitech Easy Shaker, the bubbling shaker from Rains is a very buoyant bait. So this bait will actually nose down and tail up, like I was just mentioning. So on a drop shot, this thing will go kind of and look unnatural. Like it's almost straight up and down in the water. You have to kind of work it to get that head to go up, and it's always going to be at a little bit of an angle as you're working the bait. And then if you kill it, it's going to go like this. So I think this is a faster moving drop shot bait where you get a little bit more tail action out of it, better on a jiggle style drop shot retrieve, or throw this thing on a Ned rig in one of these smaller sizes, like a 3.5, maybe a 4-inch bait, and let it do the work for you. So this is more of a hybrid drop shot slash Ned rig bait, in my opinion. But the Kitech Easy Shaker, the Rains Bubbling Shaker are the main two drop shot baits that I wanted to mention. Matt's still remembering the conversation that we had and the fact that now I feel the need to pick up Berkeley Japan soft plastics so that I can know what green pumpkin smells like. Did you guys watch the live stream from last week when I had Matt on here? And he said that the Berkeley Japan baits smell like green pumpkin. Did you guys hear that? It was absolutely mind blowing. I was giggling as he was talking about it. And it was hilarious to hear. But once I actually like put two and two together, and he mentioned that it's like a pumpkin that is green or like a squash, I was like, green pumpkin. Why do you have to keep saying green pumpkin? Like we all know what green pumpkin is. Uh, this is bass fishing for God's sake. We're this is green pumpkin. You know what I mean? Like half of the things around me are green pumpkin. This is a green pumpkin blue flash. This is all green pumpkin. Green pumpkin is a color, not a scent. Um, and Matt said that it smelled like green pumpkin. That was absolutely hysterical, and I will try them at some point. So, last order of business, last section that we're going to talk about is miscellaneous soft plastics. And there's just a couple that I want to mention because one, I've used, two, I have not used. And you guys have already heard or are familiar with these already. But one is the Geek Rack Bellows Gill. Okay, this is a fresh pack. Last year I went through a pack of these and was able to catch maybe 2 or 3, maybe upwards of 4 fish per bait on these when rigged on a screw lock hook. So I was fairly happy with those once I was able to dial it in and figure it out. That 3.8-inch size is my preference. The 2.8-inch size is really small. Okay. I found that I got bit by a lot of really small fish on the 2.8-inch. The 3.8-inch immediately stepped up the size of my catch. So I was much more happy with that size of bait. I think the 5.8 inch is probably overkill and will rule out a lot of bites. So I think the 3.8 is really that ideal size in my eyes. But uh, that is a bait that is meant to be fished weightless and weedless. So on a screw lock hook on a Texas rig. Um, I think. Although this year I plan to try out fishing that thing on a Nico rig, and I mean, I found that on a weightless Texas rig, it did much better than on a weighted Texas rig. It has a lot of weight to it already. Does not need to be thrown with a bullet weight. I think it would be a good free rig bait, although it is pretty weighted. So I don't know about that necessarily. Now, I did notice straight out of the gate that the Jackal Honey Nugget, on the other hand, um, is a free rig bait, not a weightless bait, not a weighted Texas rig bait. Uh, that is a free rig bait. So that doesn't come into the conversation here because these are must-have baits, and I'm still figuring the honey nugget out. But the bellows gill, in my opinion, is kind of top of the list, top of the mind at least when it comes to must-have miscellaneous soft baits that are JDM. Of course, Matt is going to say something like the Berkeley Power Wiggler, something like you know, uh, you know, I don't know, the Depths Kinko worm, whatever. But the other bait that I have a fair amount of experience with and do recommend, I've talked about this bait before a handful of times. This is a new color to me. It's just what is sitting right in front of me. I could reach across halfway across the room and grab my box where I've got 5 or 6 bags of these. But this right here is the Kitech Salty Core Tube. And they make this in 2 sizes. I actually do like the bigger size better than the smaller size. And this is the smaller, but this is a 3.5, and I believe the bigger is a 4.5 inch tube. Um, so one, this is a really well made tube. You can see that these tentacles are poured perfectly. I mean, they're all separated, they're all thick and beautiful. But two, this tube is not hollow. It is firm and filled with salt, and there's a nubbin on top of this guy. It's plugged. This bait has a butt plug. So this is a dual purpose bait. You can fish it on a standard Texas rig. You cannot fish it on a standard tube jig because it is not hollow. So you can throw it on a Texas rig, use a bullet weight if you want to, peg it or not. Uh, but really, this bait is heavily salted and filled and weighted by itself. So you can throw it on a weightless Texas rig, or better yet, you can rig it backwards and rig it Texas rig through the butt of the tube and then out the nose. And as you flip this thing around, it will back glide. So this is a back gliding bait, just like the Yamamoto Fat Ica and a number of other baits on the market. But the Kitech Salty Core Tube is an underrated bait that works as a tube bait, as a Texas rig. You could call it a tube goby craw style bait, or as a back gliding bait. So the the Salty Core Tube is right up there on my list of miscellaneous JDM soft baits. And then 2 baits that are new to me, but that I plan to fish a fair amount this year. One is a stick bait, one is a free rig creature bait. And we got depths and OSP. So the depths cover scat. I've only tossed this around once or twice so far this year, and I'm a little confused by it, if we're being honest. Um, I only threw around the Big Brother, the 4 inch, um, and I'm a little bit perplexed by it. You know, of course, I fished this bait on like a really bad day to be fishing it, but essentially what you get with the cover scat is a profile that is a crawdad with its claws in. So a defenseless crawdad. Whereas most crawdad baits are meant to imitate crawfish with, in a defensive posture. This is the opposite of that. So, uh, really well thought out bait here in that you get a slot to pull out your hook here, bury the hook, um, or the line tie inside the bait, come out the back, and expose into this notch. So really cool bait that is really a glorified stick bait where you get uh, a subtle kind of wag and um, shimmy on the fall with the cover scat. But essentially, it's meant to be fished really slow on bottom on like a twitch style retrieve. Keep it on bottom, whereas like a Yamamoto Senko, you're gonna want to pull up and then let the bait kind of do its wiggle on the way down. The cover scat is less so that, and a bait that is more meant to be fished dead sticked on bottom, and then you just get the fish's attention by twitching that bait and making it do, kind of walk through the water and then just kind of float down, sink down slowly. So the other bait that's on my list is the OSP Doe Live Beaver, and they make this in a bunch of different sizes, but this is the 3.5 inch, and to me, this bait is really a free rig bait specifically. I know that you could throw this thing on as a jig trailer. You could probably drop shot it or throw it as a punch bait or on a Tokyo rig, but I think as a free rig bait, this thing is going to excel. So, kind of like the Jackal Honey Nugget, I don't know exactly where it comes into play best, but it has this joint. So you get that exaggerated action, but on a free rig, it's going to follow the weight. And once the weight hits the bottom, then it's going to fall horizontally and kind of have a little bit of a shake to it. So scented like a lot of Japanese baits are. Seems like a really cool bait. They recommended 2-aught hook on this 3.5 inch size. I've got a couple packs of those and plan to put them to use. So I think that pretty much rounds it out for the 10 categories that I wanted to talk about. There are so many more baits that I could have and maybe should have mentioned, but that took a full 2.5 hours. It is right at midnight my time here, Mountain Standard Time. So I don't know. I didn't do a lot of addressing your comments. I mean, I guess I at least acknowledged most of them, but you guys were not crazy busy in commenting or steering the conversation. I suppose that was because I've just been chatting away the whole night. But man, time seemed to have flown by. So I'm gonna finish this little drink of bourbon and hop out of here because it's late and I am on dad duty tonight and tomorrow. And we've got a family get together with some friends tomorrow night. So I'm going to dip out of here in 1 second. But anything else that you guys want to address or add that maybe I missed tonight, please leave in the comments right now. Matt says, I like using the doe live beaver on a punch shot. It makes the claws move a little quicker and gives more of a reaction bite. All right, that's fair. Uh, yeah, I can see that. You know, where you actually get that joint doing more of the work on that type of rig. That makes sense. I don't stunt says, do you have the 6th Sense whale? Yes, I do. I've got a few packs of them. And I actually do like it as a swim bait. I've got a couple of them rigged up right over here. I'll grab them for you. So I think I've got this one on a 4/0 owner beast hook, if I'm not mistaken. This feels a little bit small to be a 4/0, but it could be. So this is the whale on a keel weighted belly hook, keel weighted swim bait hook, and this is the whale in a different color pattern on a exposed jig head, but with a weed guard. So this is the 6th Sense Divine swim jig head. Two different ways to rig the same bait. You don't necessarily need to have that weed guard on it, but I think that this is a really good swim bait. You know, it's a bait that hasn't really gotten the attention that it deserves or perhaps will get long term. And it's hard to say because it could just as easily go the opposite direction. But I think this bait is really good. It's got these fins for stabilization a little bit, but it's got that middle amount of action to it where it does really well on a wide range of retrieves, and then its head does wag. So it's not a dramatic action like some of the other baits on the market. Uh, but it's a surprisingly good bait. In my opinion, quite a bit better than like, you know, this 6th Sense Divine swim baits, which I've got a few packs of as well. But the whale is a much softer plastic than what you get out of the Divine swim baits, but it's still like a middle of the road soft plastic. Whereas the Divine is a very stiff, soft plastic. The whale is like kind of ideal. You'll see as I stand it up that tail doesn't bend over a lot. So this is more like a Magdraft in terms of the amount of kick that you get to it. I think it's a little bit more friendly to swimming in cold water than a Magdraft. You know, you can swim this thing just a little bit slower, but it does best on like a medium speed retrieve. The whale, good swim bait. That's my general review on it. Daniel says, "What size do you go with on the bellows gill?" So, as I said, the 3.8 inch is my favorite size. So, I usually go with a 3 or 4/0 hook on that size, on the 3.8. But on the smaller 2.8, I go with a 1/0. So, you know, I jump from a 1/0 to like a 3/0, maybe a 4/0, depending on what I've got available. You can still get away with a 4/0 just fine. It doesn't really affect the action of the bait. Um, so yeah, screw lock is really the key when it comes to the bellows gill. You need to have a screw lock to go into the front of the bait. Otherwise, you're going to run through these baits a lot quicker than you want to. Okay. So something like an owner all-purpose hook, owner twist lock is the deal, because then you don't have too wide of a gap, and a 3/0 or a 4/0 will do just fine. But technically speaking, a 3/0's probably the best. And Matt says, "Do you feel like the whale is a copy of the Spark Shad?" No, I don't. I don't. They've got a different profile um, in terms of the way that the bait tapers. The top of the bait, sure, the tail is perhaps a little bit similar. Um, and you do get those stabilizer fins, but no, the whale is meant to be a weedless swim bait, and the Spark Shad is not. And the amount of tail kick that you get out of them, the soft plastic that these baits are poured with is very different. So no, that's a good question. I never really thought of that though until just now, man. I don't stunt says, are those Guggen tackle boxes on your right? No. This is a lure lock box, and it's just one. And it's to hold my swim baits in place so that I can show you guys these swim baits, and they're not just going to roll all over the place. But I could certainly swap this out for different types of baits, but no, this is a lure lock box with the sticky stuff on the bottom. I do not have any Guggen tackle boxes. Plus, doesn't Guggen own Bass Mafia anyway? I didn't know that Guggen has their own tackle boxes. I thought they just came out with terminal boxes. I don't know. Tim, you missed everything. It's been 2 hours and 38 minutes, my dog. You missed a lot, dude. I don't even exactly know what to tell you. I'm sorry. No, the red boxes, these are Plano, just 3,700 size boxes, watertight. So I have a bunch of these. The gray are the same. These are the gray, red, gray. I've got a red one up here. I like those a lot. Tim says it's every time. Yeah, you can catch that replay, no problem. Matt, I don't know why Bass Mafia sold to the Guggens, other than the fact that maybe the Guggens just believed in the product so much and saw an opportunity to buy them out for a reasonable price. I don't have an answer there. I thought Bass Mafia was doing a good enough job and had a good brand going. I don't know why they would sell out, let alone to the Guggens, but I don't have an answer for that, man. No, these are the regular 3,700 size, not the deep. I really don't have any of the 3,700 size deep. Like those are just too much for what I tend to do. So, yeah, I just have 36 and 3,700 size boxes. So, this is a 3,600 size box of like wiggle warts, and this is a 3,700 size box of Rapala. balsa baits. You can see the size difference. This is a flambeau, plano. But these are the regular boxes, not the deep. Okay. So, like all the boxes that I have are this regular size, not deep. Just because I don't have a boat, there's no reason for me to have deep boxes. I can get away with the standard size boxes 9 times out of 10. Daniel says I'm anti Guggen. LOL. Yeah, I hear you. I think a lot of people are either anti or pro Guggen, and I feel like I'm kind of somewhere in between, right? Uh, it's hard not to respect the impact that they've made on the industry, right? They've definitely blazed a trail. Whether you want to say that trail is admirable or not, that's up to you. Uh, when it comes to YouTube, I would say it's mostly admirable, right? Like the guys all had success on their own. They all started collaborating and accelerating their growth together. And then they created a brand, and then it got a little fuzzy because they started stirring up the industry as a whole when they dipped their toes into multiple markets that were outside of YouTube. So that's where it got weird. Uh, and they're one of these companies, like I've mentioned, there are a bunch of these companies that kind of jump into the market, and instead of dipping their toes as a small business and really being strategic about quality of product and innovative design and a lot of things that in my opinion matters, they're one of these companies that just like dove headfirst into the market, and they came out with a whole line of stuff, and half of it or more just sucked. Uh, was just blatant knockoffs or not that good. That's disappointing to see, right? Some of their stuff is good, right? I'm not just fully hating on the Guggen squad or on Guggen Baits at all. Uh, in fact, if I had the financial backing, who knows if I might do something similar. I don't know. It's not like they were a small business ever. So I can't totally hate on them. Uh, but at the same time, uh, I have not liked a lot of the stuff that they've put out when it comes to product. Uh, I pretty much stick to consuming some of their content and some of their content. I don't even follow all of them, let alone um, watch any of their content religiously. So sorry to get controversial, if you will, but you say their stuff sucks, uh, but people are cool. But the people are cool. Sure. John B is really the only one I watch, says Matt. John B is probably my favorite, um, even though that sounds a little weird to say. Um, yeah, I think he's probably the most true to himself in terms of his vision for what he always wanted and what he still wants. But I can't blame any one of them for evolving over time and deciding that, you know what, I'm growing up as a person. I'm seeing success. My family is growing. My interests are changing, and therefore my content is going to change. So I can't blame Justin Rackley or Flair or even Alex Perrick, or I suppose Lunkers TV. Like their lives are changing. So it is what it is. Like they're growing up, and we've watched all of that throughout the process, right? Um, Flair and um, Justin Rackley specifically have started families. John is getting married and starting a family. Uh, Rob he has gotten divorced and is now going to get remarried, which I don't love, but it is what it is. And Perrick is figuring life out. So, they're all relatively young guys. So I can relate to that journey of life and figuring it out. Daniel says it's the new ones I can't stand. Yeah. And there's about a dozen of them. So I hear you. Matt says, I think John B also says he wants to go pro or try tourneys in 2 years or so. That will be interesting. Yeah, that would be interesting if any of them decide to go pro. And I could see a couple of them doing that, right? I mean, Rob tried that last year a little bit, and it didn't work out all that well. But totally fine. I admire the fact that he tried to a certain extent. There's some controversy around that, and I understand it. But that would be awesome if John decided to do it. It would be sweet if Justin decided to do it. But I get why having a family with multiple kids makes that complicated. So, yep. All right, guys, we've been on for 2 hours and 47 minutes. It's 12:15 my time, 2:15 for some of you guys. And I know it's Friday night, but I got to get up like in 6 hours from now. My kids are going to be waking me up before I know it. So I am out of here. Thank you guys so much for your time tonight. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. I probably will not be on tomorrow night because I've got to get together with some friends. We are starting a new tradition of what we call like around the world cooking. We're gonna get together once a month and cook cuisine from a different part of the world, different country every single month. So it's pretty cool. And tomorrow night's week number 1. I think we're doing Switzerland and like fondue type of stuff, but I don't know. So tomorrow night I'm not going to be on. Have a great night. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for your support, and best of luck on the water, guys. Peace.